Okay, and we are live. Welcome to the Darkside. This is Darkside with Tabitha Purple and the coming storm over there. If you are watching this on replay, we really appreciate you watching and sharing, liking. Please follow Pastor Purple on Facebook or on YouTube or Instagram for up-to-date information, sermons, the Darkside, Bible journaling, and all sorts of other fun and creative activities. Welcome to this evening's show. Now, this evening's show is kind of action-packed. Our focus, if you were with us last time, this time we are looking at the issue of violence against women and police violence, and we're looking at the case of the Sarah Everard case, a case out in the UK. What we will say to you, welcome. If you are joining us, please write a comment in the comment section so that we can see you. If you have questions or you want us to slow down or unpack something, please do pop that into the comment section. We should be able to see your comments. If I need to adjust Facebook, please let me know, but YouTube and Facebook should interact perfectly. And we should be able to see all of that. Okay, so that's the welcome, and that's what's being said. The case that we are discussing this evening is the case of Sarah Everard, 33-year-old marketing woman from the UK. It's a British case. It was in the southeast of England and within the London region, although she didn't end up, unfortunately, staying within the London boundaries, but she lives in South London. So I just want to go through, if this is helpful, I don't know, Mr. Storm, if this is helpful, but to go through a kind of timeline to bring out all of the highlights of what we're talking about so that people can get a sense of how quickly things went and what the case is. For those of you that are joining us from around the world, you may not have followed the ins and outs of this case. So I want you to understand what is happening and be clear about what we're talking about. Okay. So this year on Wednesday, the 3rd of March at 9 p.m., Miss Everard goes missing. She is leaving a friend's house and she's going to take a 50-minute walk to her home in Brixton, which she never makes. There is a video of her that is released then on the Saturday, the 6th of March, showing that she's about to go through Clapham Common, which is a very famous area in London, in the south of London, and a journey that many people take and frequent. She's doing that walk. So there's a video released on the 6th of March. That's 3 days later. Monday the 8th now. So further, like 5 days later, specialists are being called in from around the country to help with this case. And by Tuesday, we have a sniffer dog search. And by midnight of Tuesday, we are told that a serving police officer has been arrested in the case. On Wednesday the 10th, we're told that the serving police officer was not on duty and he is identified as Wayne Cousins and that human remains have been found. By Tuesday the 11th, that officer, Wayne Cousins, receives a head wound while in custody. He is taken to hospital and he is treated and discharged back to the police station. By Friday, the confirmation is that they have found a body in the Kent woods. So Kent is outside of London. So if you think of it like a council or a commenter, or I don't know what language you use in yours, but there's London and then there's outside of London, two different areas. She's gone quite away from the 50-minute walk that she would have been going home. And once the confirmation is given on the Friday the 12th, she's gone missing on the 3rd. By Friday the 12th, Wayne Cousins is charged. He goes before a magistrate on the 13th with the charge. He doesn't make a plea at this point. And on the 18th, an inquest is opened. And on the 13th, there is a vigil for Sarah Everard. Now, this is a really important factor. There is a vigil. It's being held on Clapham Common. This is the area that she was walking through to get to her home in Brixton. And this is really controversial because the police are heavy-handed in their response. There is, of course, a national pandemic going on. There's social distancing issues, and there's all sorts of other things. But they arrest for protesters, and there are plastered across British press images of women's faces being smashed to the ground as police officers are arresting them, and there are some very famous images that went worldwide. From that day, the Prime Minister declares that he's going to open up he's going to chair a meeting of the Crime and Justice on how to protect women. So the Crime and Justice Committee are going to meet and they're going to discuss how to protect women. And on the 15th, but a mere however many days later, legislation is introduced into the House of Commons to under the guise of protecting women, but it is actually right to protest legislation, but it is being adapted, at which point it's not thrown out, but it's sent back for review between the two-party system. So we here also have 4 or 5 parties maybe that are involved, but there are 2 main parties, and it's been sent back for, I guess the American term would be bipartisan discussion. On the 1st of June, the post-mortem reveals that she died, and this is the second post-mortem. The first post-mortem was inconclusive, and so they had to request a second one. She died from compressions to her neck. And on the 9th of July, Wayne Couzens pleads guilty. And on the 16th, he is finally sacked from his job. So the 16th of July, compared to when he was arrested to when he's sacked, they convene a misconduct hearing in private. No one knows what happened in that room, but we do know that he is sacked at that point. And then on the 29th and 30th, he is sentenced to a whole life prison sentence. That's the term, a whole life prison sentence. It's very specific. It means that he will stay in for his whole life. And so there's no, without parole, I think is what you would call it in other countries, etc. There are a number of factors to bring out from this information, from this story. Not least of all, that immediately after his conviction as a now not serving police officer, but conviction for a crime he committed as a serving police officer, the question was asked, well, how do women keep safe? And the answer was given in this way. If someone approaches you who is alone, plain clothes, and in an unmarked car, so those are the 3 things they have to be before you can challenge them, then you are allowed to challenge them. And what you must do if you are approached by somebody claiming to be a police officer who is alone, in plain clothes, and in an unmarked car, you are then allowed to call 999, scream your lungs out, call for help, call 101, call your lawyer, and effectively it's almost saying treat them as if they were regular citizens. So if they've showed you a badge and it all looks very legitimate, but you feel uncomfortable, then you are allowed to challenge that authority. But only, of course, if they're in plain clothes, if they are alone, and if they are in an unmarked car. So you see the predicament that this is building to, because this week we had another case of a serving police officer who is being investigated for charges of rape. That's what the case is that we're speaking about. So what are the things that strike us from this case, Mr. Storm?
There's many things. As I said, there's more things that have come out about it that I think are disturbing. I just want to push back on 1 or 2 things that you said, because I think it's important to confront the narratives that have been put out. One thing you said was that Wayne Couzens, the police officer that committed this rape and murder, was off duty. A police officer is never off duty. Let's just clarify that, because I think that was part of the narrative put out by the police to try and distance themselves from what happened. So instead of taking accountability for it, and saying, yes, he was one of us and he did this and it was heinous, similar to what they would like Muslim leaders to do whenever there's a Muslim terrorist attack. You want all the leaders to take ownership of this one lone individual, but you're refusing to take ownership of Wayne Couzens. So I think we need to push back on that narrative that he was off duty, because a police officer is never off duty. Anything you say to a police officer is and will be used against you in a court of law, you know, and it's they don't come in just as average witness. No, they come in as a police officer.
And we can further back that up, because there was a case this week, I think it was, that we were reading about, and there was an undercover police officer, and obviously this police officer had entered into a relationship with a woman in his undercover capacity, and she had sued, taken them all the way up the chain to say that what he was doing was immoral and should be illegal, because, you know, they class it as, well, this is a grey area because he's undercover and, you know, blah, blah, blah. But he deceived her for 2 years in a relationship. And that's a separate case, but I think it speaks to the point that at every point of her relationship, he was always on duty. Nothing was off limits, and it was proven, and the court sided with her and upheld her case, because a police officer is always on duty. So whatever they're doing, it is on duty. And that's in the UK. And of course, if you are somewhere and there is a crime being committed and a police officer does nothing, and they are seen to do nothing, whether they're in uniform or not in uniform, with badge or not with badge, they can be taken into disciplinary procedures for that. They are to actively participate in the stopping of crime if it's happening in front of them. So if they go into a store and somebody, you know, starts to mouth off or do whatever, or there's a fight and they do nothing, then they are also held up in that. So I think that's really
technically important. That's not true. That great country that you call the United States of America, that is an
well, that's different, but we're talking about the British system here. I'm not talking about America.
Well, you said in most countries, so I'm just pointing out that that's not actually
okay, sorry,
the case.
let me just let me just limit it to the UK system and how it works there. So if you know that there's a police officer, and we have that here in the Netherlands, like if your neighbours are relatives of police officers and they might come onto the street to visit Omar and Opa or their mum and dad, and, you know, you might get a message to say, oh, don't worry, you know, they're on the road, blah, 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 blah. But they're here to have a lookout because there was something. They're not on duty. They're here to see their parents, but they might be looking out or talking to someone because there was an incident, but they're doing it out of charitable feelings. Well, no, they're doing it because they're a police officer and it's their job. And it's always their job. Their job doesn't stop. Sadly for them, I guess. And sadly for us, I don't know. That's a different conversation. But yes, yeah, the way that I think that's really important, because in this case, the distance they wanted to put between this officer and the police force, it happened really quickly, and it was disingenuous, because as more facts were revealed of the case, and we come to find out that he had the nickname, he had the nickname the rapist, right, in the group, and he was known to be misogynistic. He was known to be well, his nickname was the rapist. I think that speaks. I think that just says everything. I don't really need to feel like I need to justify that there was a problem if your teammates, who are all police officers, are calling you the rapist, and you end up raping somebody. I think we can obviously see that there are some flaws in that system. I don't think that needs spelling out to the average person, but I think that the way that the press releases went, the way that the national media and national media outlets like the BBC, and I can put some links into the comments if you'd like. Just let me know if you want some links to these articles, because I have them on the screen. The way that they put that distance, he's off duty. He's not. He's a serving officer, but he's off duty. But he was in plain clothes. But it was his own personal vehicle. But it was this. You know, really trying to push themselves away. And not deal with the systemic problems of policing in the UK. this is not the first case, and it won't be the last, because you're not dealing with the systemic issues within your police force of hiring people who clearly are not fit for the job.
Right. So you mentioned the word systemic there, and I just want to interject. I have sent you an email, and in it there's a link which might be worth putting in the comments. It's a link to a podcast that is worth listening to. Now, this is the best podcast to listen to, of course, but this other one is still worth listening to. It's done by the Guardian newspaper, and it's with investigator, someone who retired. Her last day as investigator into police misconduct was coincidentally the day that Wayne Couzens was handed out his sentence. And what she details is that she did a report 2 years ago. I think she did a report in 2015 as well, detailing all of these problems.
Yeah.
Right. And talking about these problems. And when you listen to what she's saying, it is horrific, to say the least.
Yeah.
So there are 120 referrals a year to the IOPC. That's the of police conduct. What's the I for? Anyway.
Internal.
Okay, right. That one. So they there's 120 referrals a year for domestic abuse. Okay. So 120 for police officers are referred a year. And there's a pattern that she says you see happening. And this is where the police seek out vulnerable women. So women who are victims of domestic abuse or street workers.
Right.
Okay. And what will happen is they come in the guise of, you look at that person, you're in a vulnerable position, and you look at that person, they're here to help me. And then they will say, oh, anytime you need me, just call me, I'll be here to help. And they give the phone number to the person, and it just goes downhill from there. Or with street workers, what they will say is that if they give them sexual favors, then they won't press charges against them. Okay. And she gives one account of this one police officer who was in contact with 13 different vulnerable women. One of his victims, he sent over 400 messages in one day.
What are you doing? How are you
How are you doing
a job?
He also sent naked pictures of himself, right, that were taken from the police locker room. So he's on duty doing this. But she also speaks about a problem, and as I said, she highlighted these things, and she talks about the fact that when you say the same thing, time after time, afterwards becomes soul destroying. Yeah. So what she says is that there's a problem with the vetting process. And what happens is what you often see happening in the US, which is police officer gets a hint that they've been referred to their line manager or the standards department. So they transfer to another police department. So they just transfer on out, and they transfer on out. This was Wayne Couzens' third posting. So before he ends up at the Met killing Sarah Everard, he was at 2 different police forces before that. And I can guarantee you that there were issues there. And In fact, just today, I believe a trans person has come out with allegations against him that go back 13 years or something like that, but they go back a number of years, in which he attacked and molested them. Right? So, yeah, we're talking about a systemic problem, and she highlights other issues and she talks about it. Her name is Zoe Billingham, and it's a really interesting conversation that she has regarding the state of policing.
Mm.
And she touches on other issues to do with this subject and other failings, and suggests a few things that can be done. So we're talking about a systemic problem within the police force, but I think the problem of it being a systemic issue goes even higher than that.
Okay.
So it goes up to the government itself. It goes up to the prime minister. Dave, Santan Dave, don't know if you know who he is. But anyway, Dave, great artist, great musical artist. At the 2020 Brit Awards, he comes out on stage and he calls Boris Johnson. He says, our prime minister's a real racist. And he's spot on with that. But I'm here today to tell you your prime minister is a real misogynist. Right? So just this week, there was a call to make misogyny a hate crime. I don't know if you saw any of this.
I didn't see the discussion around it. I saw the headline, but I haven't had time.
Okay. So there was a call. Boris Johnson says no.
I'm so surprised.
Right. And then you had the deputy prime minister, who is that twit, Dominic Raab. Right? But he's also the minister for justice and something else. Right. Okay. So now he comes on and he says misogyny is wrong. It doesn't matter if it's a man against a woman or a woman against a man.
Okay, you had to take glasses off of that, because I'm sorry, do you understand the definition of misogyny? I mean,
that's the whole point.
It's slightly problematic that you don't understand the definition of what misogyny is.
And you're the justice minister. Who's
justice for whom?
Right?
Justice for whom are we talking about there?
There you go. But okay, so that's Dominic Raab and his foolish behavior.
Right.
But what you have is Boris Johnson, who's reasoning for not wanting misogyny to be a hate crime. Have a guess. Come on. It'll be like one of those quiz shows where you got to guess the news of the week. Let's see if you can guess his reasoning.
Because he would be found guilty? No,
That's
that wasn't
close.
it.
That's close.
Because it affects all men?
You're getting close.
Baked into British society, patriarchy, and white supremacy?
Close. His reasoning for not wanting to make misogyny a hate crime is because the police force will be overwhelmed.
Yes. Do you know, that was my next guess. It was my next guess. We wouldn't have the police to deal with the crime.
Right?
We don't have enough to deal with the crimes we have.
You know there's a problem, because you're saying if we actually make this a legal issue where we have to do something about it, we'd be overwhelmed. We wouldn't be able to cope. So you know there's a problem.
As a woman, I'm going to say that the women who are, what I think it's 51% of British population, 63 million in the British population, I think it is currently. I mean, y'all need to do something, because the man basically said, if we made this a crime, if we made this a legal crime, we would not be able to cope with the ramifications of that. We wouldn't have enough police. Meaning, let me just let that really spell out. Meaning, many people are guilty. It's so prevalent. The problem is so systemic. It would affect pretty much every man in the country. We wouldn't be able to cope. But you women, it's okay. We'll throw you under the bus. You can cope a little while longer on the receiving end of the misogyny. You'll be fine. I mean, just be strong. Isn't that what we say? Strong women? Didn't we do that last week?
Yeah. So now Dominic Raab.
That's painful, you know.
Dominic Raab comes on, and in his foolishness about misogyny, he goes on to say that he doesn't believe you need extra laws to deal with this. What you need is proper enforcement of the current laws. Now,
can I just do a little pause there for just a minute? Because I have a statistic that just really I want to share with you that might just help with this moment. Of the rapes that are reported in a year, 4.9 million women are estimated to have been a victim of sexual assault, 1.4 million of those of rape. The number of reported crimes are 59,000. Of those 59,000, 1,439 result in a conviction.
Look,
what was he saying now? What did he say?
He said what you need. Look, in some
it's better
regards,
enforcement. Oh, but you can't even
right. He's right in some regards that you do need better enforcement of the law. But I think this is where the intersectionality of race and gender should meet. You have the laws to deal with racism, and you're not enforcing them properly. So it goes to show it doesn't matter whether you bring in the laws or not. They're not going to enforce them. So you can bring in misogyny as a hate crime all you like, but they're not dealing with the race, which already is a hate crime properly. So for me, in some ways, yes, he has. There is some substance to what he's saying.
Well, 59,000 and only 1,000 convictions. That's the lowest conviction rate of any crime in the UK. I mean, right. You ain't getting no.
For me, make misogyny the hate crime and still enforce the laws properly. Done.
What's the issue?
Problem solved.
It's an interesting point that you could make misogyny a hate crime. And what impact would that have on the daily life of women around the world? Like women in the country, so you talk about one country. If you made it around the world, it would make a change that even I can't even imagine a world in which being misogynistic is a crime. And how sad is that I'm on the receiving end of misogyny quite frequently, by all accounts. And yet imagine it being a crime. How liberating. I mean, it feels like we need to sit down as women and have a conversation about what would it really mean if misogyny was taken off the table. Like if you really could call the police after somebody's misogynistic crap, you could actually call them and they would come and enforce it as a hate crime against you. How would that transform the lives of women up and down the country? How would that transform the lives of the little girls in classrooms? And we had this report not too long ago, in fact, when schools were in, it was 2 years ago when schools were in, that talked about violence against girls in the classroom, saying that teenage girls, on average, were receiving more misogynistic, violent, sexual, threatening behavior. The rates were increasing. So what started as, you know, a little boy would pull the girl's bra strap, or he would do all of that behavior would be made illegal. You could not go into school and terrorize the girl in front of you by grabbing her bra strap, flicking her constantly. You would not. Please, Mr. Storm, take us on, because I can't. It's a world I can't actually even imagine and cope with. Like my brain is struggling to compute with that. And I think also, as you say, with the intersectionality of race and gender now, when we talk about issues of racism, you know, imagining living in a world without institutional racism is quite difficult. But I know that the law framework exists to allow for that. And that's in my head. So when I am on the receiving end of somebody's racist diatribes, I'm often able to to find that place within me to know that it's possible that this person can get into trouble for their action. Whether it happens or not is slightly a different issue, but it is possible. But as a woman, I don't even have that within my framework. I don't have that within my framework. Like, it doesn't exist. Like, it's possible that you're going to get into trouble for being misogynistic. By whom?
Listen, I couldn't answer that for you. Look, all I can say is, yeah, listen, let some boy try that with my daughter in a few years. And listen, I'm not above going up to the playground and giving your kid a punch in the gut.
I think our daughter will probably do that just by herself. Well, you know, and some of these
Well, I'm
cases
going to teach her to.
well, you know, some of these cases, I mean, for a lot of women, this is just part and parcel of growing up, you know. You get your first bra, the boys at school start teasing you, they start bullying you, they start pulling on your straps, they start, I mean, it's a lot that you have to deal with. Oh, I can see your bra, poke your breast, you know. I mean, the overly abusive behavior that is acceptable, that the teenage boys are allowed to conduct themselves against teenage girls, is actually quite shocking. And if you add to that, and I don't want to get too distracted, but if you add to that now social media, you know, boys sending pictures all over the place of girls, you know, even if they've photoshopped it, this is what she looks like naked, and photoshopping it and sending it out as if it's her. That level of intrusion and abuse, young girls have come to accept as normal. That's just the way it is. And those girls that fight back, that when you pull my strap, I punch you out, and end up in the school office, those girls are labeled trouble and angry and so many other things. So I think, you know, for you to even say in passing, there might be a world in which I could expect that one country on earth would implement a law to say that misogyny is illegal, when you can't even have assault against a woman. A teenage girl can't even claim assault when a boy is doing this. To me, my mind is just blown. I'm like, oh, what are we talking about again, Sarah Everard? You know, it's a lot to comprehend, because common assault, if you went up and punched a guy, it's common assault, right? Like, if a guy punches a guy, it's common assault. But if you go up and grab some girl's breast because her tits are coming in, and you want to have copper feel, so to speak, if I put that in London accent, you know, that's just, oh, it's just boys being boys. I'm sorry, what now? And yeah, okay. Let's get back to the case. So the case, what issues are brought out from dealing with the Sarah Everard case? It goes very quickly. I will say this, when I looked at the total package of how quickly things escalated, I had questions about the number of women who went missing every year, actually, because I really did. I queried. I was like, how many women are going missing every year who are being found as quickly as this? And I'm grateful for her family that they have this closure, and I think it's wonderful for them to at least have this whole situation really closed up for them. And I'm grateful that he pled guilty and didn't have a drawn out case for the family's sake, because I think anyone who's had to take someone to court for violence against women will know that it's a horrendous process, and it completely dehumanizes the woman. What was she wearing? Where were you? Was it late? Did you flirt? Did you do that? I mean, you know, they bring up boyfriends, they bring up sexual past. It's really dehumanizing to have you put through. So I was really quite surprised at how quickly things escalated for this case. And I wonder if that is in part because they knew quite quickly that it was a police officer who had done it. And that made a difference to the case. So I had a question mark of how did this, because the number of women that go missing compared to the number of women that are found, those statistics are actually quite a little bit more scary. So I think that was quite interesting in that regard. So I think that's an interesting point to bring out, that this does go fairly quickly, even for the UK. I think that was a fairly quick series of events. I'm sure for the family, our condolences. I'm sure that felt like a lifetime, that 6 months, but it really, you know, she went missing in March and he was sentenced in September. That's a relatively quick case, and knowing people that work in the legal system, that's quite something. I mean, he appeared before the courts several times, but doesn't actually say anything until he pleads guilty on the 9th of July. And in that process, it's trial by. Now everybody's just putting everything out into the media. We're finding more things out about him. But what I wanted to come to really was the idea of the advice that was given out afterwards. The advice really, I'm going to be honest, it angered me to a certain degree. So I really wanted to look at this advice that was given to women. If you feel safe, if you feel unsafe when you're approached by a police officer. And I found this to be really traumatizing because they put a caveat on it. So the police officer had to be alone, had to be in plain clothes, and had to be in an unmarked car for me to feel unsafe. With all due respect, I feel unsafe and have been taught since I was a little girl. It is not safe to be with a singular police officer ever. If confronted with a singular male police officer, call for a woman. Refuse to move until they provide you with a female officer. I've been told that since I was little, since as long as I can remember. So I was quite surprised that people didn't know that or didn't have that same feeling and weren't being taught that. I kind of found that really quite surprising and quite traumatizing, actually, because as I knew from my community, from the community I grew up in inner city London, little black girls, that's what we were taught. You don't get into a police car with a singular officer. If he is alone, and even if they're in pairs, you don't do it. Like, this is, your life is in their hands and it could end badly for you. And I've heard that story since I was a child. So it really surprised me that now all of a sudden this was a thing, when I've been hearing about that since I was 4 or 5. It's a few decades have passed since I was that old, you know. And I have been with my mum when she's had physical reactions of fear. When I was a little girl, when a police officer would approach, I've seen her color drain out of her body. I've seen her tense up. I've seen her become really petrified about whatever's going to happen next. And the police officers, I remember being very pleasant and kind and not really doing anything. But I do remember that feeling of unease that she, as a woman of color, had going and speaking to a police officer or a police officer approaching her. And I don't think that fear comes from nowhere. You know, statistically, it doesn't come from nowhere. This is not the first case and won't be the last case, but there is something just obviously dramatically different about this case that's brought it to the forefront, which I find really frightening. The other thing that they say is you should scream and draw attention to yourself if you feel uncomfortable with a police officer. Now, this is one of the things that I worry about, and immediately there was backlash over these comments. Scream, draw attention to yourself, run to a shop, go into a business. If you start behaving like that and the person has a badge, the response of that person will be to tell other people, it's okay, I'm a police officer. She's having an episode. And you will be seen and be viewed and will be victimized within that, either orally, as is what he says, oh, you know, is a woman, she's having a little episode, she's, you know, she's been a bit melodramatic, you know, don't worry, it's okay, I've got everything under control, it's all right, love. How many times do men without badges get away with that? And you're telling me to behave like that is going to help, when by all accounts, over the years, police officers have told women, when you are in danger, don't scream and carry on, shout fire. Because fire is a universal thing and people are likely to call for services and then come and see what the problem is, and you need help. So you've told me that when any regular Joe comes up, what I need to do is start screaming fire at the top of my lungs. My whole life I've heard this statement, you know, because rape isn't going to cut it, because assault ain't going to cut it, help me is not going to work. I have to scream for something that would endanger other people's lives. So therefore, they will be prompted to act and call the fire brigade. At least somebody with a flashing light is going to come and rescue the situation. But when confronted with a plainclothes, alone, and in an unmarked car police officer, you don't want me to do any of that. What you want me to do is scream and make noise and draw attention to myself, because what do you think is going to happen? Misogyny is alive and well. Men still think women are emotional wrecks. We are still at the whims of whoever is actually doing what exactly. How is this going to impact the life? Add to that, does this only apply to some women? Because as a black woman, if you start carrying on and screaming and trying to get people's help and attention, are they going to help you? Or is that going to require handcuffs and you getting dragged away? Will they help you, but it will require your death? I mean, it's...
Well, let's put it like this. As a black woman, you'll save yourself from rape, but you'll probably end up murdered. Look, the reality is that this advice was never intended for black women, right? When police interact with black people, when they do their stop and search, or in the US, stop and frisk, they call it, and they stop somebody, the assumption is that person has done something wrong. But when it is a black person, the automatic conviction in that person's mind of criminality, case done. So if, this happens to a person, a woman of color, and then the police officer pulls out their identification and says, I'm a police officer, the assumption by anybody standing by is criminal. The police are doing their job. Nobody's going to get involved. We saw the video of George Floyd where the man is literally killing him, and people are standing by feeling powerless to interact and prevent this man's murder because these people are police officers, right?
And because all that they're saying, all that they're doing isn't making a change. Because, in the George Floyd case, you're talking about trained people were standing by saying, what you're doing is going to result in his death, talking to the officer, explaining why what he's doing is wrong. That's not making a change. There are recordings happening. That doesn't make a change. So for me, what is it that's going to happen other than there will be another dead body lying there, and everybody will have recorded it to see, and afterwards my name will get dragged through the mud, and they'll find things to slur the women with. Because when it's Breonna Taylor, they managed to slur her character. When it's Sandra Bland, they managed to slur her character. Whenever you are the one on the receiving end of the violence, somehow as a woman, your character just runs through the mud. You'll pick up any kind of person.
I just want to come back to the Breonna Taylor one, because actually they couldn't find anything to demonize her and mischaracterize her. So what they did was they made her guilty by proxy. Her ex-boyfriend did something wrong, and so they made her guilty by not by proxy. They made her guilty by proximity,
by association,
right?
By association.
And I think that's just something brought up. And I look back at this, and as I said earlier, I think this is where the intersectionality of race and gender has always met. When women were trying to get the suffrage in the US, there's Sojourner Truth, and what's the name of the woman over there that they always hold up? Oh, I can't remember her name. Anyway, they talk about her.
If anyone knows, pop it in the comments for us, please.
But when Sojourner Truth came to speak at a meeting, they didn't want her there because she was black. And Sojourner Truth, well, she just said, forget you. She gets up there and she does it anyway, and she gives this great speech, of which comes out the "Ain't I a Woman" speech. Because black women were being excluded from these spaces.
Well, in
And
the UK, it's exactly the same. So we're talking about the UK situation, and this case happens
yes,
in the UK. The suffrage movement in the UK notoriously had no and would not interact in any way with any of the racial anything. They wanted nothing to do with those conversations. Had nothing to do with it. When you're talking about abolitionists, and then you're moving on forwards to equal opportunities and stuff like that, not my problem. Hands off. You know, I don't want anything to do with it. When things are happening to black women, hands off, not my problem. And this has been a ongoing situation from suffrage before and all the way through.
yes. And so you then fast forward through time and you end up in the civil rights movement. And at the forefront, once again, are black women, right? But we fast forward again, we now have the Me Too movement. Now, if I recall correctly, that was started by a black woman. But black women have been saying for a long time their voice is not heard in this. And so that started, the Me Too slogan comes out around 2005, 2006. I think it first begins to pop up. Fast forward a decade, you then have this, and this is just to give an example, because I think it's important to point out that the same with Cousins, Wayne Cousins in the UK, and I'm now going to talk about a case in the States. These predators have a history. It's more than just one. Yeah. Right?
It's always more than just one.
So you have a police officer in the US called Daniel Holtzclaw. And he is convicted of rape and sexual assault. I think he has 18 charges against him. There were actually more complaints than that.
Right? Oh, of course. I mean, you said he's convicted of 18?
18, right? And what they talk about is that he specifically targeted women of color because they were the most vulnerable and unlikely to be believed. Right?
There's days when I just want to quit. I'm like, I quit. I don't know what I'm quitting. I quit adult life. Like, I can't do this anymore. This is insane.
But here's the thing. Where was Me Too in all of this? So when I talk about the intersectionality of race and gender, forget Me Too. I think the slogan for black women needs to be us all along.
Wow. I think very painfully that is definitely true. And I think that when you look at the different cases, the politics of the optic politics, you know, if it's a blonde white woman, we can all rise up and support them. But if it's a brown, indigenous, black woman, then you know, there are question marks. And I think, you know, we've not too long just come off of the back of the conviction of R. Kelly, and everyone knew. Yeah. I mean, when he had his first case, we were all horrified by the details. Let me rephrase that. Some of us were horrified by the details. And what I find interesting is that the abuse that he dished out, I don't know how to say that, the abuse that he gave to these women, to these children, to these girls, the lives he destroyed, and people's response was, and now let's convict their mamas. So as if somehow all of the women were culpable for a predator coming in and doing what predators do. And I'm not saying there weren't cases of women who were complicit, but it is shown that predators, who particularly pedophiles, on children, on girls, these are not women. These are underage girls. They're girls. They're underage because they're girls. These are children, but because they're little brown and black girls, the world went, is it really? Is it?
Well,
and how many of those girls' lives, mothers' lives, women's lives that he manipulated, that he groomed, that let slide. And we didn't say let's convict his lawyers, let's convict all the people around him who were enabling him. Let's convict the women of it. And I mean, let's blame the women for the man's behavior. And I was just like, really? That was your first thought when you went, he's finally been locked up. Now let's convict some more women of this, because clearly it's the women's fault.
But you're surprised by that?
I'm not, but it bears the point of misogyny should be illegal. And we come back to misogyny should be illegal. I didn't even know that was an option. I feel like this is a new hashtag, misogyny should be illegal. Like, that should be the thing that we all say from now on when somebody comes at us with this misogynistic thing. Do you know that misogyny should be illegal? That it should be a hate crime. Misogyny is a hate crime. Y'all need to get convicted of this. This is not the way to behave. We're running. I mean, there's a lot to be said about this case, and I think, you know, drawing on this point of what the advice is that is given. The other point that I want to bring up is that the advice that is given is contingent. So if a police officer is in uniform and is in a marked car, then I am to have a different response to that police officer. I'm not allowed to call 999 and verify their information. I'm not allowed to scream. I'm not allowed to draw attention to myself. I shouldn't be calling 101 to get any further information. I shouldn't be challenging that police officer. And I think that that's really important, because when that advice was first said, the way that we heard it and the way that it was reported is, these are the advice they're giving women, do this. And a lot of Black people immediately responded with, does that apply to me too? Can I do that? As a Black person, when I'm stopped, can I call the 999 and ask for a verification that this officer is not about to assault me? Can I check? And the answer, of course, is no. But then very quickly, when you actually looked at the details of what was being said, they weren't giving women the right to actually challenge somebody they felt afraid of. They were telling you the only time your fear was relevant is if it was in the minority of cases. What the other thing I find quite interesting is that not all police officers wear uniforms. So, of course, DCIs, sergeants, and other officers, plainclothes officers, exist all the time. That's how they do their business. They do it in their whatever clothes that they wear. And so, am I allowed to respond to a detective that does that? Is that not going to get me into worse trouble? Because of course they're higher up the rank. And if you're higher up the rank, then I'm putting myself more at risk with dealing with you, because you often come in plain clothes in an unmarked car and alone. You're not traveling out in many, because that's your job as a detective. So it seemed disingenuous to offer this platitude. And I'm going to say that the platitudes begin and originate with Dame Cressida Dick. I think that's important, because throughout this process, her job has been called for, and she still has her job, even though serving officers under her watch are being convicted, arrested of crimes to do with sexual violence against women, amongst other things.
Right. So I just need to interject here, because I meant to actually mention this earlier when you were going through the timeline. So it's important that you mentioned Dame Cressida Dick, and I think it's a very astute observation to say, actually, no, they're telling you as a woman when your fears are valid. I think that's a very astute observation. But this is happening under Dame Cressida Dick's watch. She was also in charge of the Metropolitan Police at the vigil for which women were brutalized for protesting the rape and murder of a woman at the hands of police. Okay, I just want that irony to sink in for a minute there. We're upset because the police are brutalizing and murdering women, so we're going to protest it. So the police come out and then brutalize us some more, right?
And then the next day come up with a law to protect their rights to brutalize me in a protest.
Right. Now, one of the things that you mentioned was that there were famous pictures of it and things like this, and the protesters that were arrested. What I wanted to mention then was that of one of these protesters that was arrested, she has complained that since then, 50 police officers have contacted her on a dating site.
That really stopped my heart, man.
Right?
That
So
really, like, I was hurt when, like, that was scary. That's scary.
it
That is
is,
really scary.
because
And
essentially
she
they're saying
says
to you, we
they
know who you
sought her
are.
out. We know
Yeah,
who you are. We're seeking you out.
we
This
can
isn't
get
by
to you
accident.
anytime.
We can get to you anywhere through any medium, and we can continue. And she said, and this is what really frightened me the most, we know you have trauma from us, so this is why we're contacting you.
Yeah.
You are just
And
perpetuating violence against this woman.
and Dame Cressida Dick will preside over any investigation and clear them. That's pretty much how it's going to work.
And really, they should be summarily dismissed. You are
They should
seeking
be.
out a
Look,
victim to further victimize her.
listen,
Like, that is a gross misconduct.
if I were
Gross
to
misconduct.
if I were to compare Dame Cressida Dick, I mean, you know what? Dick by name, Dick by nature. If I was to
That's a very
compare
British
her,
thing to say.
you know, whatever. But if I were to compare her to a character in a movie, it would have to be Steven from Django. She is the female version of Steven.
Yeah, yeah.
And if you don't know who Steven is, that's Samuel L. Jackson's character in Django. You know, because she enables and presides and justifies all of these abuses. It doesn't matter what the abuse is. You know what? In her eyes, the Metropolitan Police are never at fault, and she enables it.
And she does. And as I say, I think it sounded like they were giving sound advice. I mean, even though it was really bad advice, but at least they had tried to come up with something. And then the final point to add is, you can give the general public all the advice you want. If you aren't training your perpetrators, if you aren't training the police, if you aren't vetting them properly, you will always, the public, the general public will be always on the receiving end of crappy policing. Because the reality is, it is not my job as an average citizen to police the police. That is not my job. It is my job not to break the law and to be a good human and do whatever else I want to do. But it is your job to police the police. So telling me that when I'm stopped by police, I have the option to do this only under certain circumstances, it's not my job. It's your job to ensure, where possible, that there are no criminal gangs running your police stations and officers, and you don't have officers known as the rapists. There aren't 120 cases of domestic violence going on in your police rank and file. There aren't 50 officers tracking down a victim and perpetuating violence against her by invading her space and her life and threatening her. That's your job, not mine, to work out how I gotta stay safe because you can't keep them safe. No, do your job.
There was something I wanted to say actually, and now I've forgotten on this. But look,
well, I think that whenever a crime like this happens, and whenever there is, and in this case, we're really grateful for the family's sake that they have a conviction, that he pled guilty, that it was a open and shut case, so to speak, and that their suffering is not prolonged through the justice system, because we know that doesn't end well. But whenever there is a case like this, it raises the point frequently and consistently that there are problems, systemic problems within policing. And by expecting the general public to become more proficient at policing the police officers, you are effectively making your police service redundant. And this is why there are movements in the USA particularly, and not the same in the UK or other countries, to say abolish the police. If we as general public have to become more proficient at policing police officers because there are systemic race, gender issues within your police force, race, gender, and homophobic issues, I should say. There's many, and religious. Then your police force is redundant. You are not capable of enforcing any bringing peace with arresting for crime. You're not capable of doing your job if we have to police you. That's not. I mean, most of us didn't train to police officers, and the fact that in some countries legally you are responsible to police the police officers legally, as in you should know what the crimes are and you should be able to call them out on it, etc. It's insane. It's an insane principle and premise with which to govern and to keep the peace in a country. And the same platitudes that are given to Black people. Well, if you just do this and if you just do that, are the same platitudes that are trotted out for women. If you just did this and if you had just done that, then you would be fine. And I think that it is harmful and it doesn't get to the root of the problem.
I am glad that Wayne Couzens was caught, and I'm glad he will never see the light of day. I am glad he will never get out of jail. I really am. What I think I find that grates and irritates me so much is that there are people saying, how could he get away with this? Because 3 or 4 days prior to that, he had exposed, or maybe it was 3 or 4 weeks, I can't remember, but just a little bit before that, he had exposed himself to McDonald's staff. And they had gone to the police and taken video evidence and said, look, here he is. And the police did nothing about it. He was still walking around with his warrant card, which he used to abduct Sarah Everard. Had they investigated properly and taken away his warrant card, he wouldn't have been able to do that, or at least not under the pretext and pretenses that he did. He may still have done it because he's just a evil, wicked man, but he wouldn't have been able to use the pretext and cover of being a police officer. It would have made it that much harder. And people are saying, and the questioning and the scratching their heads and the wringing their hands and the saying, well, how could this happen? People had complained. And if you had done your job properly, we wouldn't be in this position. And for me, the thing that grates is that Black women have been saying this for decades and decades. And the question now must be leveled at these people that are saying, how could Wayne Couzens get away with it? If you had just listened to Black women, I'm not even talking about the Black community at large. I'm talking specifically about Black women. If you had just listened to Black women, this wouldn't have happened. Right? And I think for me, that is one of the things that grates me. And I will say in this, because we've gone over time, and I'm sure you're going to want the last word in this. And I think as a woman, once again, you should have the last word on this. I will say this. As a Black person, when I talk about issues to deal with race, I don't need your apologies. I just need you to believe me. When women are talking about their experiences at the hands of men, I don't need to offer you my apologies. I just need to believe you. And when I do that, I can deal with the human before me. I'm not getting defensive. I'm not, you know, questioning what did you do. No, I just need to believe your story that something has happened to you, and now we need to resolve that.
Believe them. Well, I want to leave you with some sobering statistics, I guess. There's statistics that come out of the UK, but I think it needs to be said in the light of the conversation that we're having and how heavy that conversation is, to be reminded of why this is important. In the years 2008 to 2018, every 3 days a woman died, was murdered. She was murdered. She didn't just die, she was murdered. Every 3 days there was a woman being murdered. 9 out of 10 of her murderers, women who were the killer of those women, were men. 57% knew who the man was. The statistics are not comparable to the male figures. Only 39% of men ever know who their attacker is. In 2020 alone, 1.3% of all women in the UK were on the receiving end of violence against them. In the year of March 2020, they did a census to check, and out of the total population of women in the UK, 4.9 million of those women had been a victim of sexual assault. 1.4 of those women were victims of rape or attempted rape. Sexual assault victims in the UK are 1 in 10, rape victims 1 in 40, stalking victims 1 in 5, 1.6 million cases of domestic violence. The cases of women being abused continues to increase. The statistics go up. This year was an anomaly according to the statistics, but it is believed that the only reason that's an anomaly is because of lack of reporting due to women not being believed. Believe the women. That's the default position. If I tell you it happened, it happened. And I know for people who want to immediately say, but there are false claims, imprison those women, because it is 0.03% of any case is ever, 0.03 is ever a false claim. Imprison those 0.03. The rest of us are to be believed. In other words, believe us all. Believe when we tell you that we are afraid, that we feel unsafe. If someone had believed that Sarah Everard was going through that, then maybe, just maybe, there would have been a difference for her life. Folks, we are back next week. Next week we are back with the Darkside. I don't know what we're going to talk about. There's been some controversial things that have happened this week. We have watched shows like FBI International or whatever it's called that have made me want to scream. I think have made me scream. There have been things that have happened that have not been nice in the world. I don't know what we're going to talk about, but if you have a topic that you'd like us to talk about, please let us know. But we will see you next week, Sunday, 9 o'clock on the Darkside, Facebook, YouTube. Like, subscribe, share with your friends, put it out there. We're doing this. God bless everyone and good night. Peace.